Welcome to Veterans Chronicles. I'm Greg Corumbus. My guest this week is Ned Connor. He is a veteran of the U.S. Navy Seabees from World War II, and he's kind enough to join us today to share his experiences. Ned, it's good to have you with us.
Pleasure to be here, Greg. Thanks for inviting me.
Tell our listeners and viewers a little bit about your background. Where did you grow up, and how did you join the service?
Well, I grew up in Greensburg, Pennsylvania. It's in western Pennsylvania, about 30 miles east of Pittsburgh. And after high school, the war had started. I graduated when I was still 17, and I went to an aircraft school in Glendale, California, called Curtiss-Wright Technical Institute. Wanted to get into the ground forces of the Air Force. So it was 1,920 hours in 10 months, and when I came back, I tried to enlist and had a weakness in my left eye vision that they wouldn't accept me, and but the requirements for being drafted were physically somewhat less. So I, in a month or two, got notice of being drafted and hoped to get into the ground forces of the Air Corps. But at that time, they were looking for the lowest level rating people, youngest, for the Navy Seabees. And when I went to the first desk, I was a sailor, and he put it down that you're in the Navy. And I said, but I was to go to the, so you're in the Navy, buddy, get out of here. So you do what you're told in that period. It was a very popular war, and prior to getting into the service, I had that trip on a train from the Los Angeles area back to the Pittsburgh area. It was a long train ride, and there was no air conditioning on those trains, so the windows were open, and particularly when we got to the Middle West, we had the windows open, and every station we would stop at, boy, there were these ladies with all types of gifts and things like that, snacks, beverages, and they would go down the line, and everybody on that train except maybe 2 or 3 people, me included, were in uniform. And I can remember how this lady came along and was giving this, and she got to me and withdrew what she had. I felt terrible, but it taught me how huge the participation in World War II was, and I couldn't wait to get into uniform. It was embarrassing not to be. Then after getting in, went to Camp Perry, Virginia for boot camp. We had Marine instructors, DIs, drill instructors. They were very, very hard on you. And
what was that like?
Well, I tell you, they would do anything to make you miserable. They would come in at 2 in the morning in the barracks and wake you up and get you out and drill. There were some people that smoked, and to teach you a lesson, I remember one guy was smoking a cigarette, and when the DI said, the smoking lamp is out, he took his cigarette and took one final drag, and the DI said, go over there, get that shovel, dig a hole. He had him dig a hole 6 feet wide, 6 feet long, and 6 feet deep. Took 2 days. Had him put the cigarette down there at the bottom and fill it back up. So they just did it to teach you, don't question. And you know, at the young ages of late teens, early 20s for many, you did what you're told, and they made that point so clear that you never questioned.
So y'all got the message pretty quickly.
Pretty quickly. So after boot camp, Camp Perry, Virginia, we took a train thinking we were going first the way the train was headed to Gulfport, Mississippi, and then it turned, then we were going to Great Lakes. These are places where the Seabees would embark for overseas. Finally ended up at Port Hueneme, California, which is in Ventura County, north of LA. And your final training there occurred, and then you go to San Francisco, and we got on a troop ship. And it was a very interesting ship. It was a captured Italian liner that was renamed, or perhaps renamed. It was the Monticello, similar to the Jefferson's home. And it was a real luxury liner, the third largest in the world at that time, converted to a troop ship. So we had 7,000 troops and probably about 1,500 ships company on that ship. Going across the Pacific, because this ship was fairly fast compared to many of the ships that had convoys, escorts, we did not. And so during the day we would zigzag because of submarine concerns, and at night go straight. And then after 29 days, and the only stop was in New Caledonia in the South Pacific for some reason, and then to Milne Bay, New Guinea, on the eastern shore tip of what is Papua they call it, New Guinea now, which was a very major base, supply base, and we operated the docks, loaded and unloaded ships, did some construction work, had a lot of heavy machinery, but the number of ships that we worked on were over 500. And mostly American, but British. The Scandinavian ships were always the nicest. They had electric winches, whereas most of the others, particularly the British, had old steam winches. And you either worked on the docks, where you load pallets, or in the hold, or I was a winch operator much of the time. So we just stayed there, wondered where we were going to go next. And we never did go anywhere until the war was over. And we said, wow. And I meant to bring, but I couldn't find it, a little newspaper from our battalion that was put out on one sheet of paper, 8.5 by 15 or 18, Japs surrender. We thought, oh, we're going home. Well, we didn't go home for another 4 or 5 months, because somebody had to take all this material and either get it ready for shipping back to the States, but most of it we took out into the bay, which was huge, on these pontoons, and pushed it off into the water. We're talking about bulldozers, we're talking about steel for Quonset huts, we're talking about you name it. The amount of material that was destroyed is typical of, I guess, in any war. The costs include what you don't think about when it's over, getting rid of the material. Now when I hear about them coming back from Afghanistan and all, I can imagine the logistics problem of what to do with the material. So when we did come back, we came back on a what was called a mini aircraft carrier, about 10 or 11,000 tons, the USS Attu, which is named for an island up there in the Alaska area. And that was very different than the 29-day excursion going over. This was much faster. We stopped at Pearl Harbor, had Liberty. Actually, we stopped at Brisbane, Australia, because we had a boiler problem to fix. So we had some variation. You could go up on the flight deck anytime you wanted. Very different than the trip over. Came back, Treasure Island is where we landed. And it was interesting. At Treasure Island, they operated the mess hall 24 hours a day. They were still bringing troops home then. The war was over for some months, but it's amazing how long it takes to get everybody back. And so when you come in, you go directly to the mess hall. You can order anything you want. We got in at close to 1 a.m. in the morning, and I ordered a big steak, a head of lettuce, and a quart of milk. Because overseas, we never could get fresh anything. And milk I loved, but you couldn't get that sort of food stuff. So after being there for a while, not too many days, we took a train to Sampson, New York, and I was discharged in March of, I had looked it up this morning, March 13th of 1946. And I then had a high school diploma, some things dealing with aircraft and engine qualifications that were not useful. And under the GI Bill, I entered the University of Pittsburgh in June of 1946. And I can't be more complimentary of our government for the investment that they made through the GI Bill. Everybody may have taken advantage of it, but the government return was great from those that were educated. So because I was behind in time, I went around the clock. The semester I took electrical engineering, and I finished in 2 2/3 years. Did nothing but go to school and study. Occasionally you'd eat, but other than that, you did nothing. Got out in February of 49, graduated, and immediately had a job. The best one that was offered was from General Electric Company, and started in February at Pittsfield, Massachusetts. And every 3 months you would go to another plant to learn about their products. Next plant was Erie, Pennsylvania, the gas turbine locomotive. While there, I married my wife now of almost 65 years. And after a couple of weeks of marriage, only a couple of weeks, we left Erie for Philadelphia, where I had an assignment dealing with the switchgear that GE manufactures, and then to Syracuse for airborne electronics, where we were trying to design and improve the height altitude indicators of radar, and then we would have these large planes take off from Rome Air Force Base in upstate New York, and we would calibrate our equipment, our height indicators, indicate what we were reading, and they would tell us what the altitude really was. So it was involved in that development, which was interesting.
Just take a quick pause there. We'll pick up your story after this short break. This is Veterans Chronicles. We're back on Veterans Chronicles. I'm Greg Corombos, honored to be joined today by Ned Connor, a U.S. Navy veteran of World War II, served in the Seabees. He's given us the general outline of his service to this country during World War II and talked a bit about his post-war life as well, which we'll return to in a moment. But Ned would just like to kind of dive into some of the details about your service. The Seabees were created after Pearl Harbor. World War II was their first conflict that they were a part of. What was it like to be part of this new unit? I know you said earlier that you wished you were in the ground forces of the Air Corps, but was it exciting to be part of this new venture?
Well, it was in a sense, but I had a disappointment in the sense of late in boot camp in 1943, a new activity was started called UDT, Underwater Demolition Teams. The UDT teams were selected from the Seabees, possibly, not exclusively, I don't know. But in the group of my boot camp, we were made aware that there were these openings. I applied, was not accepted. I don't really know what the requirements were, but they had the primary task of going in before the Marines would go into an island and take out the underwater obstacles using munitions. Well, that endeavor became very important and did some wonderful work and became what is now the Navy SEALs. That's where the The SEALs came from the UDT teams and evolved into that, which I always thought was interesting, but I applied but wasn't accepted. So it makes me think that, in World War II, 16 million people total wore a uniform out of 135 million total population in the United States, over 10%. That's a lot. And those that were not, overwhelmingly, women included in particular, worked in some way dealing with the war effort. Rosie the Riveter.
Sure.
It was the most popular conflict. I cannot convey the feeling to be a part of what is totally popular and cohesive all together. It's never occurred since then, and I don't think it ever will. And shouldn't if we could stop some of the warring. But hell, that was the last war we were going to have. And look at all that followed. On a day-to-day basis, it was so warm in New Guinea that we worked 4 shifts, 6-hour shifts. So we had 4, you would work 6 hours and then another group 6 hours. So we had a base outdoor theater, and so no matter when you got off, the mess hall was always available. There was a movie theater when it was dark. We had movies every night. The only Japanese that I didn't see but occurred in our immediate mess hall were when the weather was raining heavy. 3 instances occurred where Japanese soldiers who fled into the jungles and the highlands and were not captured, got so hungry they would come into the chow hall at nighttime with ponchos over their heads. They were so hungry, and 3 instances where they were caught. So it made me aware of the variety of things. I see the majority of the 16 million were not in combat. It takes so many people to operate a war. And I was so disappointed not to be one of those in conflict, and now I'm very thankful.
Seabees, obviously, it's heavy labor. You talked a little bit about with working the winches. There's obviously many different construction projects going on. Did you have much background in that, and how long did it take you to kind of figure it all out?
No, because being young and low rating, I went in as an apprentice seaman and was discharged. I had the rating of coxswain, which you can operate the barges and boats. But the labor was what the lowest level of hale and hardy males can do. For example, cement was a big item that you would find that you were taking on off a ship or loading it on, and you'd pick up a cement bag. Well, I want to tell you, the cement bag weighed 94 pounds of cement, 2 pounds a bag, 96 pounds. You pick it up, it's so hot, you're wearing shorts. You cut off your thing, you wear a hat on your head, nothing on your hair. You pick up the bag and move it. You do that enough times, and finally it's bleeding in your midsection with cement powder. So it was physically very hard, and it couldn't have been done by other than young, healthy people.
Ned, let's pause right there one more time. We'll come back for our final segment with Ned Connor, served in the U.S. Navy Seabees during World War II. We'll be right back. We are back. This is Veterans Chronicles. I'm Greg Corombos, joined today by Ned Connor. He is a Seabee, a U.S. Navy Seabee from World War II, and he's been sharing his experiences with us. And Ned, you talked about how you went through boot camp. You mentioned that there were still some Japanese in the hills there at Milne Bay, even though the fighting had long ceased. They showed up in your mess hall when they got hungry enough. Did they ever launch violence at you, try to attack in any way?
No. There was none of that. There were so few of them. when they were stomped by the Australians in probably in 1943, latter part, they receded backwards. That was their furthest penetration that way. Going further west, in the Seabees and some of those islands, the Japanese were there much longer. The only spot in New Guinea further west from Milne Bay, which on the eastern tip, was an air base, Hollandia, and the aircraft were active taking off from Hollandia. But other than that, there was no further military action on the island of New Guinea.
You mentioned some of the work you did with the winches and loading and unloading of ships and so forth. Talk about some more of the projects that took place. Were there major infrastructure projects going on as well, or was it mainly with the ships?
No major infrastructure projects at all. It was strictly, we had docks to maintain, rebuild. We had ships to load and unload. We had material of such a variety to store in outdoor areas and keep intact, and then reload ships that would take it further to where the campaigns had achieved by this island hopping. So it was strictly a supply support activity. And it makes me aware of just how much it takes to maintain a military action. And the poor guys that were up at the front, Lord, they took a terrible toll.
How much did you talk to the men coming in and out on these ships about what they had been through?
The ships that we saw were all cargo ships, and the only military aspect, every cargo ship had a crew of Navy people manning a couple of turrets that would be for protection, but not terribly effective, not like a warship. But every merchant ship did have a Navy complement to provide some protection beyond just small arms.
Talked a little bit earlier about the climate at Milne Bay and in New Guinea. How much interaction did you have with the locals, and what was that like if you did?
Well, the only locals were natives. They were inland a little bit from where our encampment was. We encountered them. There was no communication, verbal, that was effective. Didn't know any of them. Very primitive people. And later, one of my daughters brought home a fellow whose name was Ivan. And Ivan was very short and had pygmy-like features. And I said, "Where are you from?" And he said, "From Papua." And I said, "Well, I'm a citizen of Papua." And I said, "Let me show you." And I went upstairs and pulled out a card. After you were in New Guinea for 12 months, you became a citizen. And he was very impressed and appreciated hearing that. And he came back the next day and knocked on the door. And I answered, and he had a tissue paper package in his hand, and he held it out. And I took it and I opened it, and it was the shirt that he had on the day before when I met him, which was yellowy. It was white once, but dirty, and it had a large circle with 4 quadrants where you would have a mother of pearl shell, you'd have a blue empress butterfly, you'd have a bird of 4 things about New Guinea. And I learned later, I hardly wanted to touch it, that to give it as a gift with great feeling, you give it right off your back. Had he laundered it, it would not have been, in his culture, anything at all. I still have it.
That's a tremendous story.
But so you see, we supported the activities which were throughout those islands in the Pacific. So many people involved. But I came out learning how to, accept what's you got to accept, and it taught life's lessons in spades. And believe me, it's had a positive effect on my whole life.
Give us a couple of those key lessons. What were they?
Well, that's a good question. How do you express these things? Well, there's both the acceptance, but as you mature, you will strive for achieving. You learn how to balance your life. You appreciated the gains that come from peace, prosperity, maturing, and the appreciation for your government because of all that they did. The GI Bill, the education that comes from that, it paid your tuition, it paid your books, it gave you $50 a month. My wife and I went to bought our first house in Schenectady, New York. We paid $7,290 for a brand new house. Got a 4% GI loan with nothing down. 4% doesn't sound like much in these last few years, but prior to that, nobody saw anything but much higher, somewhere between 7 and 8% and 18%.
Right.
So the government was good to you. I feel duty bound to live as honorably and support your government. And it's hard to see when things go sour, as they seem to have in the last 10, 20 years.
Sir, we were talking earlier about your life following your time in the service, your education, your marriage, your different jobs. How well do you believe that your military experience in the Seabees, both the specific skills you learned there as well as some of the lessons you were just talking about, help prepare you for your future careers?
None of the skills are significant that I learned. The life lessons are huge in how you look at life and how you attack the opportunities that then come to you through further education and jobs. After I was with GE for 10 years, I found the training I got at a great company like that was significant, and I was hired by a firm in Attleboro, Massachusetts, Instrument Development Laboratories. It was very significant in the areas dealing with electromechanical switching that was used in the early space work. The Able Baker Monkey satellites had IDL commutating switches, both in the vehicle and down on the ground, which sample information, transmit down 100 signals a second, different aspects. And so it gave me a chance for an education. The government gave me an opportunity for a good job. I became president of that company. And then I came to Washington and became president of Gardner Laboratory, which was a instrumentation company that specialized in optical sciences, dealing with equipment that uses primarily the visible portion of the electromagnetic spectrum for being able to measure color, gloss, haze, clarity, all things that you would find in the paint industry, the textile industry, the cosmetics industry, the pharmaceutical industry, you name it, there's an appearance factor dealing with every product that is made. So I have evolved and would not have had that opportunity. My plan originally at high school, due to the fact that my father was killed in an automobile accident when I was 7 years of age. I was the youngest of 6 children. My mother had to raise on a very limited budget, starting in 1932, and I learned how tough it is, and how, in my case, my mother raised a family when you don't think it would be possible. So it's not the experience in any one segment of your life, be it the military or it's the combination and how it affects your whole view of life. You want to accomplish, you want to see your children. We have a large family. We're fortunate. My wife and I have 6 children. We have 16 grandchildren. We have 8 great-grandchildren. It's wonderful to see life evolve this way. And most are better off than we, which is good to see.
You mentioned, obviously, the difficulty of your family, not only losing your father, but it was a couple of years into the Depression at that point as well. How well do you think that mindset helped you, helped so many in your generation prepare for the challenge that came a decade later in World War II?
It sure helped me. My father was very successful by the material standards of that era. His father formed a company, construction company that specialized in tunnel work. And so they did big jobs. They did the Mill Creek sewer in St. Louis. So I know a couple of my siblings were born in St. Louis, and that's a job that took 4 or 5 years. Well, in the late 20s, 1930, my father's company got a job down in the Yellow Mountains of Tennessee. Not many people know of the name Yellow Mountains, but at that time, they bid the job with the engineering information they had, and it was inadequate in that they ran into flooding, which cost a fortune to take care of. They had a payroll robbery, all cash, $7,000. So at that time in the 1930, 29, 30, 31, that period, that was a huge loss, uninsured. And so actually his company he cashed in most of his life insurance, which he had a lot of. And when he was killed, my mother was left with 6 children, ages 7 to 16, and $50,000, period, to raise on her own. So I learned from my mother and the behavior of my siblings how you pull through tough economics circumstances. And I guess what I want to say is you can look at any aspect of your life and it's a part of a total. And you are influenced by the combination of everything and the way they go together. And the military side, less than 3 years, turned out to be 29 or 30 months. And yet it's very significant what it did. But there are 88 other years. So I guess I just want to say, you've got to take everything together and see that it works. And I'm very fulfilled. We have a great family.
Ned, we thank you for your service to our country. We thank you for your contributions to our society. in all those other 88 years that you mentioned. And we thank you very much for coming in today and sharing your life story, in addition to just your military story, your entire life story with us. Thank you so much.
Great pleasure. Thank you.
Ned Connor is a veteran of World War II. He served with the Navy Seabees. He has been our guest today on Veterans Chronicles. I'm Greg Corombos. Thanks for listening. Hi, this is Greg Corombos, and thanks for listening to Veterans Chronicles, a presentation of the American Veterans Center. For more information, please visit AmericanVeteransCenter.org. You can also follow the American Veterans Center on Facebook, and on Twitter, we're at AVC Update. Subscribe to the American Veterans Center YouTube channel for full oral histories and special features, and of course, please subscribe to the Veterans Chronicles podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks again for listening, and please join us next time for Veterans Chronicles.